Week one nearly in the books. Hopefully your fantasy football teams did better than my Detroit Lions. With that being said, I've got waiver wire pickups that I think you're going to want to take a look at for going into week two. I'm going to give you two players at each position: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end. But as always, if you have comments, questions, concerns, things below, drop them in the comments. You know, I'm keeping an eye on there, and I will give you feedback and help you out. First quarterback I want to talk about, Daniel Jones from the Indianapolis Colts. I know he's a name that's always kind of been hot and cold in fantasy football. You know, he's always shown some prowess with his legs, and we saw it again this week against Miami. Do I think he's going to put up 2 rushing touchdowns and that kind of production every week? No, not at all. But I think what you saw is you saw a quarterback who is comfortable in his offense, has enough weapons to be dangerous if he needs to pass or if he needs to run. I think this is arguably the best offensive line he's had in his pro career. And I think this is a guy that in a AFC South that is growing and maybe not necessarily strong some of the other divisions, I think he's got a chance to be really fantasy productive. And when you look at ESPN and Yahoo, he's owned in less than 10% of leagues, actually less than 6% in leagues. I think it's a guy that you'll want to add. And right now he's probably a QB2 with QB 1 week upside, but definitely somebody you want to keep on your radar. Next quarterback, Michael Penix from the Atlanta Falcons. I think we saw a solid production in week 1, against Tampa Bay. You knew it was going to be a tough matchup. Tampa Bay is a playoff team and a really good team at that. But I think we saw that he's going to continue to develop. We saw a good rapport with his skill position players. I think you're going to keep seeing weeks like that where you can have him as a QB2. Again, not only Daniel Jones, QB2 with QB1 upside. I think this week he produced well. And I think you have to temper expectations for the next few weeks because he's got a contest against Washington and Minnesota, which obviously we need to see what Minnesota's defense looks like. But both those teams look to be pretty tough, So the next few weeks may be not so easy, but definitely somebody you want to have on your radar. Moving on to running backs. First one, Dylan Sampson from the Cleveland Browns. I think he had a really solid week 1, and with less than 50% ownership in ESPN and Yahoo and a lot of those leagues, I think he's a guy that you're going to want to definitely get on the back end of your roster. I know Judkins is coming back, and that will definitely play a role. But you saw throughout camp and preseason and even into week 1 that there is clearly a place on this team for Sampson, and he's produced very well with his opportunities. Even so much so that Jerome Ford was kind of an afterthought in terms of production and what it looked like today. Sampson's a really good running back, and I think he's a guy that you're going to keep seeing get worked into this offense as the season goes on. Next up, Ollie Gordon II from Miami. This is definitely a stash, but I think you're going to keep seeing him kind of like Sampson get worked in more and more and more as the season goes on. Achane definitely deals with injuries. You've already got other guys like Wright and some of them already dealing with injuries. So Ollie Gordon is a big, physical, powerful back that, yes, he had a down final year of college, but it wasn't his fault. I mean, there was so much turnover on that offensive line, and you even heard him talk about that on the broadcast when I was watching the game. They were talking about that. It wasn't Gordon, and Gordon is a big, powerful, physical back that can be their goal line back. He can do a lot of those things, and you saw them start to use him a little bit this week in a tough match against Indy, and I think you'll keep seeing that more. Definitely get him on the back end of your roster. Kind of an RB3, RB4 range. Not somebody I'm definitely confident just yet, but as we start getting into bye weeks in the next few weeks, you've got to think ahead to that. And Achane dealing with injuries, he will inevitably just because of how physical the running back position is. I think Gordon's a guy you definitely need to stash at this point. Moving on to wide receivers. Next up is Kayshon Boutte from the New England Patriots. You saw a good week 1 out of him. Had a solid, productive week. I think you're seeing the rapport with him and Drake May continue to grow from last year to this year. This was a kid that was highly touted coming out of high school. Didn't really necessarily hit his peak in college, and even so much so that when he got to the pros, he's had to work. He was at the bottom of a roster, and he's continued to work and grind and get his way up that, and you can see that it's showing. But when you look at the ownership percentages on some of the major platforms, he's less than 1% basically across the board at this point. This is one of those things where I think you stash him, and as we get into bye weeks, he certainly could be a guy that you would consider being flexible. Can we expect the same production every week? No, but I think you're going to have that potential, and we obviously see he can do it. He did it against Vegas. Why can't he do it again? They're going to have some matchups where they're going to have to throw the ball a bunch, and he's a guy that could certainly be a beneficiary because he's got that rapport with his quarterback. Next up, Quentin Johnston from the Los Angeles Chargers. I actually, as I was getting ready for this video, was really surprised his ownership numbers were so low. I know Keenan Allen came back, and I know McConkey had a really great season, but it's not like Johnston wasn't solid last year. He had a good productive season. Herbert trusts him. He's a big play threat waiting to happen. And in this offense, you need a player like Johnston. Now you're not going to get the same production every week. I totally get it. You can't expect multiple touchdowns from a receiver every single week. But what you can expect is you're going to have some boom weeks where you have that potential where you can see him get a couple of those big type plays that turn into big points for your fantasy team. That's rosterable. And when he's owned in less than 10% of leagues, and you're seeing some of the injuries and you're seeing some of the things happen in the league, I think he's definitely somebody you need on the back end of your roster. And you play the matchups. Maybe you flex him in. Maybe he continues to see some of this type of production as the season goes on. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe he booms even more, and you don't see as many bust weeks. Then he becomes a flexible and regular player on your roster, and I think that's a critical thing here, especially the receiver position, especially as we get into those bye weeks. Moving on to tight ends, I've got two, just like with the other positions. Juwan Johnson is a guy from the New Orleans Saints that every single year, he's a guy I have on waiver wire videos, and he's always less than 5, 10, 15% ownership. This year is even less than 5%, which was crazy to me. I don't expect him to get 11 targets every week. I get it, but I expect probably in the 5 to 8 range, maybe even 5 to 10 range on a weekly basis, because he's probably their number 2 pass catcher in this offense. It's really Olave, and then who do you have, Kamara or Johnson? I mean, those are kind of your top 2, and they're going to need to use them. They're going to be playing from behind a bunch. They're going to throw the ball a bunch. Juwan Johnson is a guy that has to be on your roster. He's a tight end 2 with tight end 1 upside, and if you keep seeing the 5 to 8 to 10 targets a game rate, catch potential from him, I think he then becomes a weekly startable player for you, and get him now before he starts getting chopped up on those waiver wires. Last but not least, Fannin Jr. from the Cleveland Browns. This is definitely a reach, but it's more so because I really love the player. I know he had a huge week 1. I know his ownership is less than 2% on ESPN and Yahoo. He's got Njoku. He's got Judy ahead of him. But you heard all throughout camp, all throughout the time that he's been on the Browns, they're going to get him involved in the offense. It's a big play throughout waiting to happen, and we saw that. We see the potential there, and I think that you're going to continue to see them find ways to work him in. He, again, is a tight end 2 kind of flex play at this point until we see a little bit more, but you can tell they trust him because they were going after him and they were targeting him, and he was getting involved. So these are all guys that I would definitely be targeting as back of the roster guys, but guys that you can certainly start to grab now before they are disappearing off your waiver wires. If you have comments, if you have questions, Dynasty guys, back up, back down. I know. If there's guys that are on your waiver wires you want to talk about, IDP, anything else, drop them in the comments, and I'll talk to you later.